just want to quit tennis right now, but I don't know, I guess mentally I got into very deep.
Just want to quit tennis right now, but I don't know. I guess mentally I got into very deep dark. Those words tell you something important about Alex Eala. Before the blue dress, before the headlines, before the ranking, before the first WTA singles title, before Nike started placing her in the kind of global campaign imagery that makes people stop scrolling, there was a player who had already experienced what the sport can do to your confidence. Tennis has a brutal way of exposing weakness. One bad set becomes one bad match. One bad match becomes a bad week. A bad week becomes a bad month. And if you are young enough, inexperienced enough, or simply human enough, eventually you start wondering whether the entire thing is worth it. That is why the piece of fabric hanging inside a Nike showroom right now is more interesting than it looks. It is a sleeveless tennis dress. It has a racerback cut. It has striped tape running along the hem. Large mesh panels stretch across the torso. The color is difficult to define. It is not quite navy. It is not exactly cobalt. Nike calls it Old Royal, and the reported retail price is $140. On its own, it is just another tennis dress. But put Alex Eala inside it, and suddenly the dress becomes something else. It becomes a statement. It becomes a marketing decision. It becomes a signal about who Nike believes could matter next. And that is where the story gets much bigger than fashion. Because on the other side of Nike's 2026 US Open collection is Aryna Sabalenka wearing a dramatically different design, black and red, with a lace-like overlay inspired by the structure of a basketball net. Same brand, same collection, same season, same sport-inspired concept. Two completely different visual identities. And somewhere between those two dresses, tennis social media created a story that Nike never officially announced. The rumor is that Sabalenka is unhappy. The rumor is that the world #1 has privately gone off on Nike over how the collection has landed. The rumor is that she is frustrated because Eala received the cleaner, more elegant blue design, while Sabalenka ended up in the outfit some fans have compared to Spider-Man. But here is where this story needs to slow down. There is no direct evidence that Sabalenka complained to Nike about Eala's dress. None. In fact, the public evidence points in almost the opposite direction. And that makes the real story much more fascinating. Because what we are watching is not necessarily a feud between two players. We are watching a battle between two pieces of clothing, two market reactions, and two very different stages of a tennis career. And the player unexpectedly sitting at the center of that conversation is a 21-year-old from the Philippines who, only months ago, was still trying to figure out whether she belonged at the very highest level of the sport. That is the part people are missing. The blue dress is not the beginning of the story. It is the receipt. And to understand why Nike might be printing that receipt, you have to go back to the beginning of the year. The collection was never just about tennis. Nike's 2026 Grand Slam apparel strategy was built around a simple idea. Take a different sport and use its visual language to influence tennis clothing. The Australian Open collection drew inspiration from surfing. Roland Garros leaned toward ballet and dance. Wimbledon incorporated elements associated with cricket. And for the US Open, the design language moved toward basketball. That basketball influence is what connects the two dresses that have become the center of this online debate. The mesh panels in Eala's dress fit into that concept. So, does the net-like lace construction used in Sabalenka's outfit? This was not supposed to be a competition between the players. It was supposed to be one collection, one design philosophy, one creative experiment. Sabalenka herself explained that she liked the direction. When reporters asked her about the criticism surrounding the collection in Toronto, she did not distance herself from Nike. She actually defended it. She explained that she liked the fact that Nike was drawing inspiration from different sports. More importantly, she suggested that she had encouraged the brand to move beyond the traditional tennis aesthetic. For years, tennis apparel had remained relatively predictable. Classic silhouettes, traditional colors, safe designs, clean lines. Sabalenka said she wanted something more fun, something different, something that experimented with shape and concept. That matters. Because if Sabalenka was involved in encouraging Nike to become more adventurous, then the narrative that she is simply furious because another player received a better outfit becomes extremely difficult to support. Her own public comments don't say that. Her public comments say almost the opposite. She said she loved her outfit. She acknowledged that not everybody would like it. And she essentially made the point that fashion cannot please everybody. That should end the story. Except it doesn't. Because the internet does not judge clothing the way a designer does. The internet judges it in seconds. One photograph, one frame, one scroll, one comment, one comparison. And when the photographs of Eala and Sabalenka appeared online, the reaction was dramatically different. Sabalenka's outfit became controversial. Eala's blue dress became aspirational. That difference is what created the rumor, not evidence. Not a leaked Nike meeting. Not a quote from Sabalenka. The reaction itself created the story. The internet picked a winner. Spend enough time looking through tennis social media and a pattern becomes obvious. People do not describe the two outfits with the same vocabulary. Sabalenka's look has been called bold, experimental, strange, too much. Some comments have been considerably harsher. Eala's old royal dress is receiving almost the opposite reaction. Elegant,
Clean, fresh,
regal, modern,
stunning.
That contrast matters because sports fashion is no longer simply about what athletes wear. It is about identity. A tennis player does not walk onto court wearing a dress in isolation. The outfit becomes part of the athlete's image. It becomes part of the broadcast, part of social media, part of photographs, part of merchandising, part of the player's commercial identity. And when a young athlete's image begins circulating in a recognizable outfit, the garment can become associated with the athlete herself. That is why the old royal dress is suddenly important. The dress is not officially a signature product. Eala is not Naomi Osaka. Not yet. She does not have the formal signature athlete infrastructure that Osaka has built with Nike. But something else is happening. Nike is giving Eala increasingly visible pieces of its commercial ecosystem. There have already been limited edition apparel capsules connected to her in selected markets. There have been fashion and editorial collaborations. Her image has appeared in increasingly prominent Nike promotional material. And now there is a globally relevant Grand Slam dress. That progression matters. Because brands rarely build an athlete's commercial identity by accident. They test. They observe. They measure. They release a limited product. They watch the response. Then they increase the exposure. And eventually, if the athlete continues winning, the relationship becomes much bigger. That is how a player moves from being an athlete who wears Nike to becoming an athlete who helps define Nike. And that is exactly why the old royal dress deserves attention. Alex Eala is not wearing the dress because Nike feels sorry for her. This is perhaps the most important point in the entire story. Eala did not arrive here because Nike decided to give a young player a nice outfit. She arrived here because the tennis results changed. On August 3rd, 2026, Eala walked onto center court in Washington for the final of the Mubadala City, DC Open. Her opponent was Jessica Pegula, world number 3, top seed, established hardcourt player, one of the most consistent competitors on the women's tour. And Eala was the underdog. The first set went against her. Pegula won it 6-4. At that point, the familiar tennis script was sitting there waiting. Young player reaches a major final. Faces an established star. Loses the first set. Pressure builds. Experience takes over. Match ends. Except Eala did not follow the script. She won the second set 6-4. Then she did something even more extraordinary. She won the third set 6-0. A bagel. Against the world number 3. In a WTA final. On a hard court. That was not a fashion moment. That was not a social media moment. That was a tennis moment. And it changed everything. The victory gave Eala her first WTA singles title. It pushed her ranking into the top 20. And, according to the August 11th ranking update referenced in the original reporting, she reached a career-high world number 20. Suddenly, the conversation around her was no longer, could this young Filipino player become something? It became, how far can she go? That is a completely different commercial question. Brands do not invest heavily in potential forever. Eventually, potential needs evidence. Eala just supplied evidence. The 7-month transformation, the reason the Washington title feels even bigger is because of what happened in Melbourne. At the Australian Open in January, Eala experienced one of the most painful types of tennis collapse. She won the first set against Alicia Parks 6-0. 6-0. She had complete control, momentum, confidence. The match appeared to be moving in one direction. Then it disappeared. Parks turned the match around. Eala lost the second set 6-3. Then she lost the third 6-2. From 6-0 to 3-6, 2-6. That kind of defeat stays with a player, especially a young player. It is not simply losing. It is losing a match you appeared to have already won. That can create doubt. It can make a player question decision-making. It can create fear when the same situation happens again. And that brings us back to the opening quote. I just want to quit tennis right now. Those are not the words of someone who has never struggled. They are the words of someone who has experienced the emotional side of elite sport. But 7 months later, Eala was in another final. Another major test. Another moment where the match could turn against her. This time, the opponent was world number 3 Jessica Pegula. And this time, Eala lost the first set. That was the trigger. That was the moment where the old version of the story could have returned. Except it didn't. She won the second set. Then she won the third 6-0. 10 of the next 11 games went to Eala. That is the transformation. January, 6-0, 3-6, 2-6. August, 4-6, 6-4, 6-0. The scorelines tell a story. But the psychology tells an even bigger one. In January, she had control and lost it. In August, she lost control and took it back. That is the difference between a talented player and a player beginning to understand how to survive at the top. And Nike is watching. The fashion industry notices before the general public does. There is another reason this story matters. Sports apparel companies are constantly trying to answer a question. Who matters next? Not who matters today. Who matters 3 years from now? 5 years from now? Who can become the athlete whose face sells the clothing? Who can become the athlete whose name gives a product meaning? Tennis has become especially complicated for Nike. The brand has historically been associated with some of the greatest names in the sport. Serena Williams, Rafael Nadal, Roger Federer. Those relationships help define Nike's tennis identity. But eras end. Players retire. Markets change. Competitors move aggressively. And after the departure of some of Nike's biggest tennis icons, the company has faced a different landscape. On the men's side, questions have emerged around the stalled commercialization of players such as Jannik Sinner and Carlos Alcaraz. Sinner has had a recognizable logo for years, without the kind of full retail product ecosystem fans might expect. Alcaraz has had a trademarked identity, but has not yet produced the kind of signature product launch that would make him the center of an apparel category. On the women's side, Naomi Osaka remains an obvious Nike signature athlete. But the question is what happens next? Who is the next woman Nike can build around? That question becomes much more interesting when you look at Eala, 21 years old, Philippine, top 20, WTA champion, growing international fanbase, a story that crosses sport, culture, and geography. And perhaps most importantly, a player whose commercial ceiling is still almost completely undefined. That is a brand's dream. Not because the athlete is guaranteed to become a superstar, because the athlete has room to become one. Why the Philippines changes the equation, there is another layer here that makes Eala different from a conventional young tennis prospect. She comes from the Philippines. And tennis has historically been underrepresented in the country's mainstream sporting identity compared with basketball, boxing, and other sports. Yet, Eala has been creating something different. A fan base that travels. A fan base that watches. A fan base that buys. A fan base that identifies with her. That is enormously valuable to a global sports brand. Because Nike is not only selling tennis clothes to tennis players. It is selling a story. And Eala's story is incredibly marketable. A young Filipina from Manila, rising through international tennis, breaking into the top 20, winning a WTA title, walking onto Grand Slam courts wearing Nike. The commercial narrative writes itself, and the old royal dress becomes part of that narrative. The dress is visual. The ranking is numerical. The title is factual. The nationality is emotional. Put all four together and you have an athlete identity that can travel far beyond traditional tennis audiences. That is what makes the situation so interesting. Sabalenka is still a major Nike asset. None of this means Sabalenka has become irrelevant. Quite the opposite. Sabalenka is the reigning world #1 in this story's time frame. She is one of the biggest names in women's tennis. Her personality is huge. Her power game is recognizable. Her market value is enormous. And she is clearly important enough to have input into the direction of Nike's apparel. That is why the supposed conflict is so compelling. It is not. Sabalenka is being replaced by Eala. That would be an exaggeration. The more accurate interpretation is, Nike has room for more than one identity. Sabalenka's identity is powerful, aggressive,
Bold.
intense. The outfit reflects that. Eala's current identity is different,
Young. Fresh.
elegant, emerging. And the old royal dress happens to fit that image extremely well. The problem is that social media does not analyze nuance. It chooses sides. One dress looks better. One player wins the fashion debate. One player becomes the meme. And suddenly a normal product launch becomes a rivalry. But Sabalenka herself has not endorsed that rivalry. Her own statements undermine it. She has defended the collection. She has said she loves her outfit. She has talked about fashion as something where different people can have different preferences. That is why it would be irresponsible to claim that Sabalenka is secretly furious. We simply do not know. Maybe she is. Maybe she isn't. But the evidence we actually have says she supported the direction. And that makes the real question more interesting. Why does Eala's dress feel like such a major moment? Because Nike may be testing the market. The most revealing phrase in this entire story may be mass retail. A signature collection is one thing. A limited capsule is another. But putting a young athlete into a globally distributed product that fans can actually buy is different. That is a market test. Nike can measure interest, searches,
Clicks. Sales.
social engagement, reposts, fan reaction, media coverage, and most importantly, association. If people start seeing that blue dress and immediately thinking Alex Eala, Nike has created something valuable. The garment becomes connected to the athlete. The athlete becomes connected to the garment. That association can grow. And if Eala keeps winning, the product becomes more than clothing. It becomes memorabilia. Imagine the difference between buying a random Nike tennis dress and buying the dress Eala wore during the breakout period of her career. The second product carries a story. That is what sports marketing is built around. Stories, moments, memory, identity. And Eala suddenly has all four. Cincinnati is the test, but there is a problem. None of this is guaranteed. Cincinnati is where the hype meets reality. The main draw of the Cincinnati Open begins with Eala entering as a seeded player and receiving a first-round bye. Her ranking has changed her position in tournaments. She is no longer simply the dangerous young player nobody has to prepare for. Now opponents have to prepare for her. That is different pressure. The draw is not easy. Potential difficult opponents are waiting. Amanda Anisimova is among the names in the broader section. A deeper matchup with Pegula could potentially emerge. And Cincinnati is not a decorative event. It is one of the major tournaments on the hardcourt calendar. It is the final major preparation window before the US Open. So, this week matters. If Eala loses early, the Washington title becomes easier to classify as a breakthrough week. If she reaches the second week, suddenly the Washington title looks less like a peak and more like the beginning of a new level. If she goes deep again, the Nike narrative becomes much louder. Because suddenly the brand is not simply dressing a champion. It is dressing a player who is repeatedly winning. That is when marketing catches up to performance. The US Open is where the dress becomes a statement, then comes New York. Flushing Meadows. The US Open.
A.
tournament where the American sports market and global tennis audience collide. And Nike does not have to explain the old royal dress. The cameras will do it. Every time Eala walks onto court, millions of people will see it. Every photograph becomes free advertising. Every highlight clip becomes another image. Every social post becomes another opportunity for someone to ask, "Where is that dress from?" That is how fashion trends emerge in sport. Not through traditional advertising alone. Through repetition. Through association. Through the athlete. And if Eala wins matches, every victory increases the value of the image. That is why the timing matters so much. Nike is putting the product into the market before Eala has even played her first US Open match wearing it. That is a bet. A calculated one. Not a guarantee, but a bet. The bigger Nike problem, the larger issue, is not Eala. It is Nike's position in tennis. For years, Nike could rely on superstar power. The logo alone carried authority. But the sportswear market has changed. Adidas has strengthened its presence. Lululemon has become increasingly relevant in tennis. Other brands have become more aggressive. And Nike now faces a generational transition. The old icons are gone, or nearing the end. The new generation is still being defined. That creates a dangerous period for any company. You can have the biggest name today and still lose the next generation. Because young consumers don't automatically inherit loyalty. They follow personalities. They follow stories. They follow athletes they feel connected to. That is why Eala is strategically interesting. She is not simply another player wearing the swoosh. She represents a new audience, a new market, a new national sporting story, and potentially a new generation of tennis fans. That is a much bigger proposition than one dress. The dress is a receipt. This is why the old royal dress should be viewed as a receipt. A receipt proves that something happened. The dress proves Nike made a decision. It proves that the company is willing to put Eala's image into a major global product story. It proves that she is being positioned beyond the ordinary young player category. It does not prove she will become a Grand Slam champion. It does not prove she will reach #1. It does not prove she will receive a signature collection. And it certainly does not prove that Sabalenka is angry. But it does prove something important. Nike believes Eala is worth watching. And in sports marketing, that can be the first step toward everything else. The part people don't see, the public sees the blue dress. They see the $140 price. They see the photographs. They see the comments. They see the ranking. They see the Washington Trophy. They see the headlines. But they do not see the nights when the player doubts herself. They do not see the match in Melbourne where a 6-0 first set turned into a loss. They do not see the emotional aftermath. They do not see the training sessions where confidence has to be rebuilt. They do not see the days when a player wakes up wondering whether she can do this anymore. That is why the opening quote matters. Because the commercial story only makes sense when you understand the human story. Eala did not go from struggling mentally to wearing a Nike dress because everything suddenly became easy. She went from struggling to finding another level. That is what athletes do. They lose. They question themselves. They recover. They lose again. They learn. And sometimes, after months or years of uncertainty, the results finally arrive. The Washington final was one of those moments. Down a set against the world #3. Instead of collapsing, she responded. That is why the old royal dress carries more weight than it should. It is attached to a transformation. And that is why the Sabalenka rumor doesn't matter as much as people think the rumor is entertaining. The reality is more important. Whether Sabalenka likes Eala's dress better is irrelevant. Whether she privately complained to Nike is unconfirmed. Whether she feels that her own outfit was unfairly compared with Eala's is something only she knows. What matters is what the market is doing. And the market is talking. The market is discussing Eala. The market is discussing the dress. The market is discussing Nike's tennis strategy. The market is discussing whether Eala is the next major commercial star. That is the victory. Nike does not need Sabalenka and Eala to fight. It needs people to care. And right now, people care. The next chapter starts now. Cincinnati is the immediate test. The US Open is the bigger one. And beyond New York is the question Nike really wants answered. Can Alex Eala turn attention into consistency? Can a player who shocked Pegula keep beating established opponents? Can she handle being expected to win instead of simply being happy to compete? Can she remain healthy? Can she continue climbing? Can she turn a breakout season into a permanent position near the top of the game? Those are the questions that determine whether the old royal dress becomes a footnote or a symbol. Because if Eala wins matches in that dress, something changes. The photographs become more valuable. The product becomes more recognizable. The athlete becomes more marketable. The association becomes stronger. And eventually, what began as a $140 tennis dress could become the visual symbol of the moment Alex Eala stopped being a prospect and became a star. That is the gamble. From collapse to comeback 7 months ago, Eala was dealing with the kind of loss that can make a young player question everything. She won 6-0, then lost 3-6, 2-6. 7 months later, she lost the opening set of a WTA final to the world number 3. Then she won 6-4, then 6-0. That is not just a statistical coincidence. It is a career arc. It is evidence of growth. And it is exactly the kind of story that brands want to attach themselves to. Nike does not know what Eala will become. Nobody does. But the company does not need certainty. It needs enough evidence to make the next bet. And Eala has just given them some. So, what does the blue dress really mean?
It means Nike is watching.
It means Eala has entered a different commercial category. It means her rise is no longer happening only on the tennis court. It is happening in retail, in fashion, in social media, in global sports marketing, and possibly in the boardrooms where companies decide which athletes deserve the next major investment. The old royal color is just a color. The mesh is just mesh. The racerback is just a cut. The striped tape is just a design detail. But when you put those details together and place them on a 21-year-old WTA champion from the Philippines entering the biggest hard-court tournament stretch of her career, they become a message. The message is simple. Nike thinks Alex Eala may be worth building around. Not replacing Sabalenka. Not replacing Osaka. Not replacing anybody. Building something new. And perhaps that is the most important part. Because tennis is always looking for its next chapter. Nike is looking for the athletes who can represent that chapter. And Eala has arrived at precisely the right moment. She has the ranking. She has the title. She has the story. She has the audience. She has the national pride behind her. She has already shown that she can recover from the kind of collapse that once made her question whether she wanted to continue. And now she has a blue dress. A very visible blue dress. A $140 piece of fabric that will soon be photographed on one of the biggest stages in tennis. If she wins, people will say Nike saw it coming. If she loses, people will say the company moved too early. That is how sports marketing works. The company makes the bet first. The athlete has to provide the evidence afterward. Right now, Nike has made the bet. Cincinnati is the next piece of evidence. New York is the bigger one. And the US Open will tell us whether the old royal dress was simply another product in a seasonal collection or the first visual marker of a new Nike tennis star. Because receipts are not printed by accident. They are printed after a decision has already been made. And somewhere inside Nike, a decision has clearly been made about Alex Eala. The only question now is how big that decision becomes. And perhaps that is why the most revealing image is not Sabalenka in black and red. It is Eala in blue. A young player who once wondered whether tennis was worth continuing now walking toward the biggest stage of her career, wearing a color that has suddenly become associated with possibility. From a 6-0 collapse in Melbourne, to a 6-0 demolition of a world number 3 in Washington, from questioning whether she belonged, to sitting at world number 20, from being a promising player, to becoming the face of a globally visible Nike dress, the transformation is already underway. The dress did not create Alex Eala. Alex Eala created the reason for the dress to matter. And now the tennis world gets to find out whether the blue is only the color of the outfit, or the color of the next era.